So the more and more that I've done coding interviews, the more and more that I've started to think that they basically mean nothing. And so I want to explain, because I've done a lot of work on this channel and other places to talk about coding interviews and teach about coding interviews and help you guys prepare for coding interviews. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about why I think that they mean nothing and what I mean exactly when I say that they mean nothing, because I still believe in them. And I think that this is really helpful to talk about, and I think it'll be important for you guys because I think it will change the way that you guys think about interviews, how you approach them, how you prepare for them, and I think it might even change how you guys feel about when companies ultimately make a decision about your candidacy, whether you're accepted or rejected into a company. And so I think the first thing that interviews get wrong, and I don't necessarily know if there's a quick fix for this, but it's just the fact that no one can really effectively determine your efficacy on a job in 45 minutes. And I think it's important to sort of come into coding interviews with this understanding, because this is not something that I would do when I was first starting off interviewing in the field. I used to think that regardless of the decision that the company sort of came to, I just viewed them to be right. And I think the reason that I did this was because I used to just think that whatever the company said was correct. So if they said that I was right for the job and they gave me an offer, I would assume it's right. Or if they told me I wasn't right for the job and I got rejected, I would also assume that they sort of had this scientific method to combine these formulas and decide I was not right for the job and that I was also correct. This led me to start learning and believing now that really all a decision about a candidate is, I think, is it's a confidence score. And so a company can't deterministically say whether or not you're right or wrong for the job. I really think that just depending on the company as well as their risk tolerance, they're going to make a decision that is you're right or wrong for the job. And sort of this is like the confidence score that they're sure about. And so I think especially as you go to larger tech companies like Fang, I think they require a lot higher of a confidence score for you to actually get onboarded and accepted into the company. I think especially for larger companies, they tend to have larger pools of candidates. And so if they actually end up saying no to a candidate who, maybe with 92% certainty they think is going to be a great fit at the company, they sort of believe that somewhere waiting online, there's someone with like 97% certainty. And I think they'd rather let that person in than you, because they'll always tell you, come back in 6 months, come back in a year, we'd love to talk to you again. And then, maybe at that later date, you can get a confidence score of 97% and then you'll be admitted into the company. And so I think that's the first thing that you need to think about and change about your mindset. I think it's really important to realize that when you get a decision from a company, it's not really a definitive like you're right or you're wrong. It's really just a confidence score that they think with X amount of certainty that you're right or wrong for the job, and they make a decision based off of that. The next thing that I think is sort of backwards about the interview process, or which is somewhat weird, is that I think that largely, when you look at the real industry and when you look at real companies developing solutions for architecture, for design, for actual code and implementation of APIs, etc., I pretty much think almost every single one of those solutions, or at least any solution of substance, is sort of developed and put forward by multiple people. And it's put forward over an extended period of time, oftentimes, especially at larger companies, and it's developed iteratively. And so I think it's funny when you think about the interview process, because that sort of turns it on its head, right? I feel like when you're in a 45-minute interview, you largely have to come up with a solution quickly. I think you largely have to come up with a solution independently because they're trying to objectively evaluate whether or not you possess the skills to be at that company. And I also think it's weird because it's typically not that iterative, right? I think a lot of these companies just like to hear, this is the problem. This is how I'm going to sort of solve the problem. This is how efficient it is, and this is why it's going to work. And I did this all on my own, so now I belong to be a part of this company. And so it's kind of weird when you think about it, because I think during the interview, it's like, okay, I came up with this solution quickly. I came up with this solution largely independently, and I didn't really come up with it that iteratively. I kind of just gave you what is the best answer right away, and now I'm going to go do that thing that's best right now on my own, quickly, fast, now. And that's really strange, because that's not really the way it works at all. I think especially at larger companies, if you have to solve a problem, it oftentimes starts with a document. And you say, here's the problem. This is what we want to do. This is the outcome we want. And then here are maybe like 3 ways that we can do this thing. And this is why option A is better. And this is the cons of option A. And this is why option B is better than option A, but it has these drawbacks. And then you sort of send that to people and say, hey, can you give me your opinion? And people leave you feedback. And then you iterate on the document. And then eventually you sort of all come together and decide we're going with option A because of these 3 reasons. And then you start writing the code maybe, or breaking up subtasks to actually do the code or write the code and implement that feature or design. And that's not at all how interviews really go. I think you get hints from people and you could ask questions, or you're required, or you should ask clarifying questions about the problem you're being asked. But largely, again, it's just you coming up with the solution, hopefully quickly. It's you doing it independently, almost always on your own. And then it's you sort of saying, this is the most efficient thing and this is why. So, it sort of begs the question, if this is actually how coding interviews go, why is this the case? And I think it's really simple. It's just that this is sort of like the best method we have currently, the same way that in the early 2000s, the best method was asking people how many golf balls fit in a Boeing 747. I don't know, that's just sort of like where we went with it. And so I think it's a lot better that we're, where we are today than back then, because I think this is more indicative of like whether or not you'll be efficient or effective on a job than if you can sort of like solve some sort of riddle that I feel like a troll under a bridge might ask you. But I don't think we're fully there yet. And I think we're like making progress. I think there are some things that the interview process does right now that's like decent or gives you good indicators about a candidate. But again, it's not perfect, and it's going to continue to be refined by different companies as we continue moving forward. And so even though they're not totally perfect, I do think that they actually do some things well. And some of the things that I do think that coding interviews do well, at least in sort of the vein that we have coding interviews today, is I think it does give you, pretty good indicators as to whether or not a candidate can think about a problem critically, right? Even if you actually have to solve this problem on your own, I think it does show whether or not you can sort of like take a problem, break it down, and come up with some sort of solution and think critically about that problem that you're being asked by your interviewer. I think it also shows how you deal with ambiguity, because I think a lot of these questions are purposely ambiguous, and they want you to sort of ask clarifying questions and tease out information so that you know how to solve the problem correctly in all cases. And then maybe most importantly, or at least in my opinion, it really shows whether or not you could write code, right? It's easy if you could take a clearly defined problem once you've asked all those clarifying questions and come up with a solution, and then translate those thoughts into code, which in my opinion might be the most important thing about being a software engineer, because at the end of the day, that's what you're doing, right? You're telling computers how to do something, or you're telling computers how to execute a clearly defined set of instructions. So this sort of begs the question now, why am I telling you this? And I think the reason why I'm telling you this pretty much is because you shouldn't put that much pressure on yourself. And I think especially coming out of college and doing all these interviews throughout my career, I used to put a ton of pressure on myself to do well and succeed in these interviews. And I think it's important that when you sort of take a step back and you realize that this is not a scientific method, this is not a bulletproof method, and this does not get all the answers right all the time, I think it makes you feel a lot better about sort of the environment that you're going to be going into when these interviews are typically pretty high stress, they're long, they're hard, they're difficult. And so I think when you sort of step back and take that opinion of like, this is a process, it's the process we have now, it's not perfect, and I'm going to do my best, I think you will perform a lot better on your interviews. And I think that that's sort of a key to performing well in these interviews. It's sort of having the right stress level or the right balance of being stressed and being comfortable or relaxed. And I think this goes back to science, now we're going to bring it back to science, which is the Yerkes-Dodson law, which basically says that people perform optimally when there's the right level of stress, right? You don't want to have no stress, because then you don't really care about the activity. You're not that interested. You're not that challenged. But at the same time, you don't want to be on the other side of the spectrum, because you don't want to be so stressed that you can't think clearly, you can't perform well, and you can't do the things that you ultimately know how to do, but you can't do because you're that stressed. And so you want to sort of split the difference and find the peak of that curve where you actually have the optimal amount of stress. So you care about the activity and it's challenging to you, but you're not so stressed that you sort of can't function properly. And so I think when you go into those interviews, hopefully that'll take the edge off a little bit and you guys can understand, holistically, like this is a process. This is what we have right now. It's not perfect, and I'm just going to do my best. So that was really the point of making this video. I think that when you guys take a step back and think about what these interviews are and how they're conducted, and you understand that they're not bulletproof, they're not perfect, it will hopefully make you feel a little bit better, a little bit more comfortable, and hopefully a little bit more effective in your next coding interview. So if you guys enjoyed this video, do me a favor, leave the video a like and subscribe to the channel for more, and I'll see you guys next time.
Fuck a beat, I was trying to beat a case, but I ain't beat that case, bitch, I did the race. Beat it up, where I nut shorty face. Eli Blast, cracking foes like a vase. Papa